All right, Thursday, March 4th, 2021, 6:31 p.m. and I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This is another of the negotiation sessions between the Board of Selectmen and SLV regarding a proposal for a friendly 40B development on Shingle Hill. Tonight we're going to be discussing set of conditions that the developer offered and some updates to those conditions that the Board of Selectmen wants to discuss with the developer. This meeting is being recorded. Minutes are being taken by Gail Hunter. We have Mr. Federspiel from the town of Manchester, also the town attorney, John Whitten, to answer any questions as need be. So let's get right down into it. So Mr. Engler, we sent out a response to the conditions that you offered, and I'll go ahead and go through these now. These are in response to the conditions that the applicant offered over the past week or so. So first, the applicant will provide a snow management plan which avoids dumping snow into the surrounding wetlands and sequesters piles off the public viewable face of the development. Second, in your response to your set of conditions that you sent to us, you had the $100,000 contribution to the turf field still in there, and we had asked that that actually be converted to a transfer contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust. So we would like that to get added to the collection for the Affordable Housing Trust. Third, the applicant was going to provide a plan for sidewalks, including completing the sidewalk on the eastern side of School Street to meet the existing sidewalk on School Street at 128. The town will support an ADA waiver in the developer's effort to do that. Fourth, we mentioned something very much like this. We're being more specific about it in one of our initial sets of conditions. The applicant will commit to nutrient loading conditions at the boundary of the development to meet discharge requirements of no more than 5 milligrams per liter of nitrogen and 0.05 milligrams per liter of phosphorus. So these are relatively high standards that are intended.
Okay.
No, wait a minute.
Our drinking water supply is not impacted by the development. Item 15 on your set of conditions regarding encouragement regarding waivers. We don't think that that's really needed. You can apply for those waivers as you need, and so we just want to drop it from the set of conditions. Item 6, items 12 and 13. These are contributions to the Fire Equipment Fund and the Affordable Housing Trust, and we would like those not to be contingent on a MassWorks grant. Town will commit to working with the applicant on a MassWorks grant or an equivalent grant. You can word it however you want to support the development of your water main work. Item 7, we want the applicant to provide $50,000 annually towards shuttle service as long as the shuttle is operating. Item 8, town will agree to your number of 150 units. And given our desire to maximize the number of affordable units, we want you to just stick with that number at this point. And 9, once we develop a set of conditions that we're agreeing on, we want you to agree not to appeal any of the conditions that we put in the endorsement letter. So that's what we want to talk about tonight and see if we can come to an agreement. So I'll take any initial responses from you, and I'll be happy to expand on those, answer questions. We can talk about them, and we can spend as long as you want on this tonight.
Is the floor mine, or is that a question, or?
I'm going to give it over to you right now.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeff Engler representing SLV School Street. Do you want to go through the ones that I'm okay with and first, and then the ones that warrant maybe some discussion, and then the ones that I'm not okay with?
Yeah.
All right. Number one, relative to the snow storage, we should be able to make that work. We need to submit a snow management plan anyway as part of our comp permit, but we would be comfortable with the condition that provides the specifics that you've outlined there. So consider that agreed upon. Number two, that's okay too. Just we'll increase our donation to the Affordable Housing Trust and remove the contribution to the turf field. Three is fine as well. We have prepared or almost done with the plan, but that we would be comfortable with a development agreement that requires us to do that. We would show that as part of our comprehensive permit application, but we've confirmed from an engineering standpoint anyway, we can make that work. So those three are fine. Then we get to so, I mean, I don't know where we start on 4, 5, 6, and 7. 8 is, that doesn't require any response from me. And 9, I mean, I think that's fine as well. If we have a development agreement and I'm committing to those things, I'm not going to appeal those conditions. So really it's down to 4, 5, 6, and 7. So let's start, I guess, in order. 4. As the board knows, that's much, much, much more stringent than what we're going to be required to do under DEP. And it's extremely costly. And it begs the question that I know the planning board is making or receiving a presentation on Monday night. I have some information that says DEP is considering or is not far off from lifting your consent order. So I go back to my request from before. If the municipality allows me to connect to the municipal sewer at my expense, of which your DPW has already indicated you have more than enough capacity even after we hook in. Number 4 is obsolete, and we need less waivers from local conservation bylaws, which this board itself has said is important. So I would put it back on the board that we would ask that should the consent order be lifted, we would be allowed to tie into the municipal sewer at our expense. Because as written now, we're not doing 4 unless we subtract some contributions in other areas, because A, we don't have to do it under 40B, and B, it's extremely expensive.
Well, maybe it would be a good idea for us to, I can give you, hang on, I'm just gonna mute somebody. That's better. So I can give you a rough, a quick response, and then why don't we keep going on your list, and then we can come back to these in whatever order we think is appropriate. So on the sewer side, the town is maintained generally along the way that we preferred if you had a treatment plant on site there. That's the proposal that you originally came to us with. If we allow you to hook up to the sewer, while we do have, assuming that the state lifts its consent order, we do have some capacity, but you're putting in a lot of units. And we would like to maintain as much of that capacity as we can for limited expansion elsewhere as needed within the town. And furthermore, while you're not going to be taking an enormous amount of water out of the aquifer. You're going to be taking quite a bit. It's a pretty significant amount added to the town's water usage. And we've had, a history of wanting to try to conserve water. If you have a treatment plant there, you can recharge the aquifer with the wastewater that you're pulling out of it. So there are some benefits to the town to having you stick to the original plan. So anyway, let's.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Keep going. Apology.
And as far as the cost, I'll bring in, I'll ask John Whitten to talk to that at some point, but we can discuss this. Let's keep going.
All right, number 5 or 15. I understand practically that is, you're not giving me any waivers, but just like certain things are important to you, this one is very important to me. And I want the Board of Selectmen on record that says they understand to build the plan that I have represented, I need waivers from local conservation bylaws, and they are supportive of those waivers as necessary to build the plan represented. Nothing more, nothing less, but I want the board on record in a development agreement to say that.
Well, that's part and parcel of 40B, right? I mean, that you get to have waivers if you apply for them. So
I get to have waivers, but the whole point of the LIP application is I want the Board of Selectmen to acknowledge that and to be supportive of that, and not specific waivers, that the plan that I've represented requires waivers from the local conservation and zoning bylaws, and I'm going to need those bylaws to build the project as represented, and the board is supportive of that. That's all I'm asking. That doesn't seem like
comments. John Whitten, do you have any comments to offer here?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would say that certainly the applicant can request the Board of Selectmen to support waivers that might be needed, but it can't be a player to be named later. In other words, I would never recommend to the Board of Selectmen a blanket support for any waivers that the applicant needs to build the project. I would say that if the applicant provided the specifics of the waivers that he seeks or thinks he would seek, then the Board of Selectmen can review those and discuss those with the Concom and with others. But I would not advise the Board of Selectmen to agree to support an unknown and potentially unknowable request for waiver. I understand the ask. It's not unusual to ask for anticipated waivers, but it is unusual to ask for a blank check. So I think the Board of Selectmen is entitled to know which waivers are being requested and not just the entirety of the wetlands bylaw.
John, I've submitted that on February 18th in detail.
So is that the entirety of the waivers you're requesting?
No, it was the entirety of the waivers from local wetlands bylaws. I'm not asking the board, it's pure, it's not legal, John, it's political. And I'm giving a lot to this board, and I'm asking them to go on record as saying that they acknowledge that I need waivers to build the plan as represented and illustrated over the last 6 months. And if they're not willing to do that, it's an indicative to me that they're hedging their bet. And I'm not looking for a blank check. I'm looking for a more global statement of support that says we recognize that waivers will be necessary to build the project that we've spent 9 months talking about. That's not a large ask. And if the board's not willing to give me that, well, that's going to influence how I respond to the next 3. So.
Well, I mean, that's part of your negotiations with the Board of Selectmen. I'm not sure what to say about that, Mr. Engler, other than you have the right to ask for the board's support, and the board has the right to ask for the specifics of what you're asking them to support. If it is your list of waivers, then yes, the Board of Selectmen can entertain that. I think what the chair is suggesting to you, though, is that you need to be more specific as to how those waivers are really needed to build this project. And as presented, it's a pretty blanket group of waivers you've proposed. At this stage of the game, 9 months into it, I think the board is asking you to fine tune it. So it's not just a general list of waivers that you're asking them to go to the ZBA and say, we're supportive of this broad brush.
John, did
approach
you
to
read the
waiver.
memo I submitted on February 18th?
I have.
What more can we gave a specific explanation on all of those waivers. We cannot build the project. I can't say it any more clearly. We can't build the project without those waivers. So, and some of them, as we've acknowledged, are more procedural, and the zoning board may indicate eventually with your counsel that they're actually not necessary, in which case no harm, no foul. But I am looking for a little bit more of a support from the Board of Selectmen, acknowledging that I'm going to need waivers. I'm not asking for them to agree to a specific waiver even. It's even less, but it's a statement that says they acknowledge that I need waivers.
Well, if that is the ask, and that's a little different, Mr. Engler, than what I think you were saying earlier. If the ask is that the Board of Selectmen, in its endorsement of the project, if it gets to that point, that there is a recognition that waivers will be required and the board will agree to support those requests for a waiver, that's a very different ask than specificity as to the waivers you're seeking.
Yeah, I didn't ask that. If I did, I apologize. That was not my intent. My ask is more or less as you've crafted it.
Okay, well, thanks for that clarification. I understand that.
Okay. All right. So a general statement that we recognize that waivers would be required.
And you're supportive of that.
Okay. Just to remind folks, I'm going to ask that people keep themselves muted. All members of the public, please keep yourselves muted for the duration of this conversation.
No.
Unmute only if you're called upon. If I keep hearing interruptions, I'm just going to mute everybody and unmute specific people.
All right, number 5, as written, I can't agree to that. You're basically asking me to contribute $950,000 totally at risk. If I don't get that grant, I still have to pay that mitigation. So I would be willing to give a modest percentage of that without the MassWorks grant, but certainly not in its entirety. And certainly not in combination. I would almost say I will reject that outright if number 4 is a requirement. Because number 4 is going to cost me several $100,000, and that's irrespective of any MassWorks grant. And MassWorks grant wouldn't cover that anyway.
If you would give me a minute, Mr. Engler, I'm just going to make a few changes here. All right, you can continue. I hope we have that tamped down. Mr. Engler, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you can keep going.
Okay. So on number 6, I mean, I just got this literally at 4 o'clock today, so it's not a lot of time for me to process this, if you will. I hope the board can appreciate that. But in general, if you're insistent on 4, my answer to number 6 is no. If number 4 is not important, or you're willing to contemplate allowing me to tie into sewer, I would consider going at risk for maybe 30% of the money, in which case, if the grant is not, if I don't receive the grant, you know, I'm writing you a check regardless. And then if I do receive the grant, then you get the full amount. But I can't go on the line for $950,000 in mitigation and then not get a MassWorks grant. I can't do it. It's not financeable.
All right, so either a combination of 4, 6, or some percentage of 6. That by 6 we mean the contributions to the Fire Equipment Fund and the Affordable Housing Trust. All right, next item.
7 is the non-starter. That's probably the most aggressive thing that you've asked for, because that's not even a capitalized cost. That's $50,000 annually out of operating income. I mean, and we've hardly talked about the shuttle. You know, would consider a, you know, $25,000 donation at the beginning, you know, and maybe $5,000 annually. But that one, that's not up. I was very surprised to see that, and somebody that understands, you know, finance, that's more penal than any of the other things you've asked for. So that's a non-starter as written. I'm sorry, but it just is.
Okay. Well, we have time to discuss these things tonight, so.
It's really those 4 things, Mr. Chairman. I think we have agreement on the first 3. The last 2 don't require discussion. So it's 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I realize, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I realize 4 and 6 have some relationship to each other.
All right. All right, let's see how we're going to do this. I think we're going to start by having board members make an addition, first pass on this. And I'll warn board members and John Whitten and staff as well. I changed the settings on this meeting to only allow, well, people can't unmute themselves. I have to let them unmute. I have to give them authority to unmute themselves. It looks like we have a few Zoom bombers coming in tonight, and we're just going to have to let them jump in and out and be useless. So I'll go in order of who I see, and I'm just going to go ahead and ask board members and staff to unmute themselves. Becky, do you have any comments on these items so far?
I do. I think that I am not comfortable with tying into town sewer for a number of reasons. I mean, we've had people in town who've been here for a long time who've been waiting with the hopes of connecting, and to allow a development to go before them, I don't think is right. Additionally, that's not what was presented to us initially. And I think that as far as the nutrient loading goes, that's an absolute must with the location of the development, the proximity to water resource. I think in terms of the shuttle, I think that the applicant may find that his residents really would like to have an option, but I think that perhaps we can work on that, tweak that a bit. And I would like to think a little bit more on 5 and 6. And additionally, regarding 8 and 9, 8 being the agreement to the number of units, 9, and this for people who can't see this, 9 for the applicant will agree not to appeal. Those are things that I think are important to have the applicant's name on.
He agreed to those. He said they didn't need discussion.
Okay, I thought he had just said that they didn't really need addressing.
I think he said it didn't need discussion, and I took that to mean that he accepted.
Okay, thank you. And that's where I am right now.
John Round?
Yes, thank you, Eli. My comments with regard to the nutrient loading, I know that Mr. Engler is pretty much hanging his hat on what the DEP requirements are, and I don't know exactly what they are relative to nitrogen or phosphorus, but I know that he has said that he's going to comply with whatever those rules are, and if we've got tighter requirements, well, he's still going to go with the DEP situation. So I'm not going to comment more about that. I know where he stands in that regard. With regard to the waivers, and I heard what Mr. Whitten had said earlier. I agree that just to say waivers in general is not, that does not make sense. I mean, certainly in the spirit, yes, we're okay with waivers, with certain waivers, as long as we know what they are. If there were an attachment here that says, here are the waivers, and I know that Mr. Engler provided a list of, well, quite a few of them, I guess about 18 or 19. Is that what Mr. Engler's looking for? And Jeff, I guess I can ask you directly.
You can, and just Mr. Engler, yes, you can answer.
He's got a couple of conversations going on there.
Sorry, I have family members coming in.
Yep.
I'm not looking for any endorsement of specific waivers. I'm looking for the board to acknowledge that I need a lot of waivers to build the project that we've spent the last 8 months, eight months talking about, and that you're generally supportive of the fact that I'm going to need waivers. I'm not looking for you to say that you're supportive of waiver, 2.2.13 from wetlands by the bylaw section. No, it's more of a political acknowledgement, and I don't understand the reticence of the board to do that. Okay,
so it's there's no specificity. We just we acknowledge the fact that you need waivers, and that those are expected to be forthcoming in some way, to the extent that you need them for the project.
And not that we need waivers. You're not acknowledging we need waivers. You're acknowledging we need waivers, and the board is supportive of waivers that will be necessary to build the project, as has been illustrated and discussed with the Board of Selectmen since we started this process. That's it.
Okay. I'm looking at the other one with regard to the shuttle service. I know nothing has really been, there's something that can be negotiated there. Nothing has really been laid out with regard to how that might work and what the costs might be and how much interest there'd be in the part of residents there, et cetera. It's a fairly unstructured plan at this point. I certainly have some flexibility with regard to that particular measure. So those are my initial comments.
Ann Harrison.
Could I pass my token over to Jeffrey, please?
You may. Jeffrey Bodmer Turner.
Mr. Engler, thank you for clarifying your reactions to these different responses to your proposal. I need to reiterate some things that I've said previously. One is that in the issue of the nutrient loading, you off the hand said this is going to cost you several $100,000. several $100,000 in what you've also said is a $44 million project is not a lot of money. And our water supply is in the balance here. We did not ask you to choose this particular piece of land. You chose it, and you chose it right near our water supply in an environmentally sensitive area. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask for these nutrient loading conditions at all.
Can I ask a question? I don't mean to interrupt, but what's more important to the board, nutrient loading or the sidewalk?
Those are apples and oranges.
Well, what's more important?
Those are apples and oranges. They're both important.
Mr. Engler, we've for quite some time now been receiving a lot of requests from residents that are very difficult to pick between. And we can't have all of them. We've reduced them to a set that we are now trying to find some compromise position on. And I think we're not really looking to pick between these. We're looking to moderate the conditions.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that, but you have to understand respectfully, and people that understand finance, I cannot get this project financed at certain returns, and hundreds of thousands of dollars matter. They matter. And the board keeps asking and asking, and let's rehash what happens if we don't reach an agreement. As I move forward on a different project with almost the same density, which is the same size, which is taller, which doesn't have any of the nitrogen or phosphorus conditions, which doesn't have a sidewalk, which doesn't have mitigation to the affordable trust. All of those things are off the table. It's much worse for the town. It's bad for me, but it's worse for the town. And the town keeps asking and asking. If number 4 is important to you, all right, I can do it, but I'm not gonna give $500,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust. So the same way the town is putting me on the spot, asking me to make the decisions, the town needs to make decisions relative to some of these considerations. And you're not allowing me to tie into your sewer, which makes no sense to me in light of some of the other things that are important to the board, namely minimizing the amount of waivers that I need, which the waivers would be significantly reduced. And this whole phosphorus loading thing or nutrient loading would go away. But you're on the record as saying, and that's your choice. And you have reasons obviously for making that decision. But I can't just keep giving and giving and giving. So ultimately, this board has to make some decisions as to what's important, or we just, respectfully go in different directions. So you give me this nutrient loading thing, which I'm trying to triangulate with my engineering team. And they told me, don't agree to it. It's ungodly expensive and very difficult and much more stringent than not only DEP requirements, but most municipalities, what they require for their own municipal sewer systems. Yet I'm willing to entertain it because I'm trying to get a deal done here, but I'm not going to do all the other mitigation you're asking because it's too much. So I'll stop talking, but the board's going to have to make decisions as to what's important and what isn't. Because
so you'd said earlier that we would need to choose, and Jeff may have some other things that he wanted to talk about. I'm just going to ask one question here. You had said earlier that between item number 4, which was the nutrient loading, and our item number 6, which was not making the donations contingent on the MassWorks grant, you had said before, I think, and you can check me if I'm wrong on this, that if we leave items 12 and 13, the fire equipment donation and the Affordable Housing Trust donation contingent on the MassWorks grant, then the nutrient loading would be something that you would be able to consider?
I would consider if the shuttle goes away and all the other mitigation is contingent on a MassWorks grant. Yes.
All right, Jeff, you want to keep going?
I don't think that you understand about the request for the shuttle. I heard what you said, that this would have to come out of operating expenses. The number itself is subject to negotiation at this point, but you're bringing in a parking lot with 250 cars, spaces for 250 cars in it. And what the impact of that is on the village is to bring 250 more cars into town, going into the village, trying to find parking. It's has a tremendous impact on other people's access to the businesses of the village. And we don't want to get into a situation where new residents of the town who happen to live in this project are being blamed for problems that exist in the town. And the problem is that we're already tight on parking. So, we have no place to put a large parking lot downtown. And the shuttle is a very important part of trying to do this. The actual money in dollars, as I said, can be negotiated. But we've done some research on this in the recent past, and the annual cost of the shuttle to the town is $100,000. So you say, oh, I haven't asked anything of the town. You're asking us to shoulder a disruption in the further disruption in the parking situation downtown, or $100,000 annual expense on our end.
How's it 100? First of all, that is such a gross exaggeration. 250 cars from this development going into town at once. I mean, that's laughable. And I've been involved in enough projects to know these shuttles are not used. All right, we'll have a handful of people that take advantage of the shuttle, and most of the people from our development will be like anybody else in Manchester. Some will go downtown, some will never go downtown. So to characterize it like everybody's going to be flooding the village at the same time is inaccurate. So I'm on the record as saying we'll make a small initial contribution and maybe a little bit moving forward. But we're not going beyond that in light of everything else. If we didn't have all these other things being asked for, maybe we'd give a little bit more. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to entertain it. So.
It's not a gross exaggeration. I didn't say 250 cars coming at once. You put those words out. I didn't. I said there's 250 cars coming into town, into the town of Manchester, that will be owned by residents. And
under 40,
any one of those people has the option of driving into the village to do shopping.
and under 40B, those people are treated no differently than people in Manchester now.
They don't come in at 250 cars at a time.
Well, why doesn't the town assess a tax on everybody in town, and everybody will subsidize a shuttle that'll run through the entirety of the town?
That is what would happen. We would take general taxes to fund a shuttle, and we're asking a specific contribution from a major generator who might be using that shuttle. If the shuttle is a bust and no one rides it and it's no longer in use, we wouldn't be asking for any funds from the project.
And that can be written into the language of this, Jeff. We don't want to have you funding something or partially funding something that is not being used at all. If it's not being used at all, it would be discontinued, and that would be the end of the $50,000 or whatever portion of that that we negotiate.
Eli, if I may now,
Yes, please, Ann.
at this point, I have lost track of what we are being asked to trade for what. Do we want sidewalks or do we want restricted nutrient loading into the greater area of our water supply? Is that, or it seems to me that there have been a number of things that have said, well, if you give us this, yeah. And I just like, if you would, Mr. Angler, just give us a list of what you are willing to trade for what, so that we can make reasonable decisions.
Well, I appreciate the question. And we're doing this on the fly, and I was not given hardly any time to respond. I got the town's offer 2 hours ago. I don't think I'm asking you at this point to trade sidewalks for nutrient loading. What I am saying is all the other mitigation is subject to me getting a MassWorks grant, which, oh, by the way, is going to cost me $50,000 just to hire the consultant to do that. I have proposals on that. So that's another $50,000, which is at risk to me. And so yes to the sidewalk, yes to the nutrient loading, no to any non-contingent mitigation on MassWorks, and no to the shuttle subsidy, other than, I'll give it. How many housing units are in Manchester? 2,000?
Roughly.
Approximately?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, so what is that? I'll get my calculator. So that's 7.5%. Our new housing units would be 7.5% of the town.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so to me, if the capital cost is that, we shouldn't be expected to pay any more or any less than everybody else. And that would be $7,500. The show of good faith, I'll offer $20,000 to the startup of the shuttle, and that's it.
That's an interesting calculation, given that a significant amount of our population lives in the center of town and would have no use for the shuttle, where you are adding people at the periphery of the town who, at least in the opinion of our Board of Selectmen, would benefit greatly by being able to go into town without driving.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, I've been involved with a lot of multifamily projects, and shuttle service, from a urban planning standpoint, theoretically seems like a great idea. But for a project of our size, it seems humongous to the town. The ridership is going to be a joke at how little it is. Shuttles are good when you're in Watertown and Cambridge and high density areas. You get a lot of ridership. Manchester's not going to see that. And I'm not going to fund, money on an annual basis of any significance for a shuttle that's going to be lightly used. And
okay.
So it's just not, I'm sorry, but if nutrient loading is important to the town, which clearly it is, well, then you need to prioritize over the shuttle. But I'm not doing both. I'm just not. Okay. Unless affordable housing, the mitigation, that's that important. And then let's talk about let's talk about the $450,000 you're asking me to donate to the Affordable Housing Trust. If you want to reduce that and do more for the shuttle, I'd entertain that.
Let me just go back. You said yes to the sidewalk, yes to nutrient loading, that the shuttle, if we come up with some formula that you think is agreeable and doesn't overburden, then you would be prepared to consider that contingent on it being a working shuttle.
No, I'm not going to wait on a formula. I'm telling you, I'll give $20,000 as a capital contribution, but I'm not going to agree on some formula that I don't know what it is, because, you know, at a later date, that might be, I might not be happy with that. So.
Well, okay, that's the sum of my questions.
Eli, if I might,
Yeah, please go ahead. Good.
I'm just wondering if Mr. Whitten could speak a little more specifically about nutrient loading and what the DEP would likely to require and how much more stringent the 5 and the 0.01 is.
Oh, I'm probably going to have to allow him to unmute. Did I do that right?
There,
Yep. Go ahead, Ms. Whitten.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay.
Actually, no, we can't hear you. John?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. The 5 milligram per liter standard has been a standard accepted in Massachusetts for decades. It started on Cape Cod because if you plan for 10, which is the safe drinking water standard, if you plan for 10 and you get 10, the water supply is no longer potable. So it makes no sense to plan for 10 when that is the regulatory standard. So you plan for 5 because groundwater takes a long time for nitrogen to travel through it. And by the time you hit 5, you're likely eventually going to hit 7 or 8 or 10, at which point the water is not potable. So the 5 milligram per liter standard is not aggressive at all. Treatment plants routinely treat to 5 milligrams per liter. I'm involved in litigation right now out of Weston, where the proposed treatment plant will do just that, and that is standard engineering practice. The phosphorus standard is slightly more aggressive than is often found, but when a discharge point is that close to surface water supplies, and those surface water supplies become or are used for public consumption, the town absolutely positively must insist on an aggressive phosphorus loading standard, because otherwise at some point phosphorus will travel through groundwater. It's not attenuated in the soils. It will flow down gradient and end up in the surface water supply. That benefits neither the applicant nor the town. So will it cost the treatment plant designer a little bit more to impose that kind of phosphorus limitation? Yes, it will. There is a cost imposed. I won't deny that. But those costs are routinely absorbed in projects of this size. And it is not unheard of in the Commonwealth at all, or unheard of nationally. So those are both very reasonable standards. And I'd be surprised if Mr. Engler's engineering team were to say otherwise, albeit it may not be something they want to concede. But there are plenty of treatment plants out there that require that kind of level. And DEP, if left to their own devices, DEP will not require that level of treatment for phosphorus. They just won't do it. So it's going to have to be a locally imposed requirement.
Mr. Chairman, obviously, Mr. Whitten gave a very slanted perspective towards his client. I don't begrudge him for that, but he fails to recognize that we're not in a nitrogen sensitive area, and thus the 5 standard is more stringent than we would be allowed, because we're in a different location. I mean, I'll forward the board. I got an email from my my engineer who specializes in this, Mr. Witten's an attorney. I got it from my wastewater specialist, and he clearly cited the regulations. He also said municipal plants typically treat to 3 mgl per liter or 1 mgl per liter for the most restrictive municipalities. And what you're asking me to do is 0.05. That's directly from my engineer, and he tells it to me straight. So I'm going on record as saying I'll do it, but it's severely expensive and much more challenging from an engineering standpoint. And thus I'm not doing some of these other things. And, you know, I think we're going around in circles at this point, but that's my position.
All right. So let's review where we stand right now. You'll do the nutrient loading. It's expensive. You're willing to do the sidewalk as well. The shuttle you're not interested in. Originally you said that you put 25,000 in, you're at 20,000 right now as an initial capital donation. And if you're going to do the nutrient loading and the sidewalks, you want the donations to the Affordable Housing Trust and the fire engine or fire equipment to be contingent on a MassWorks grant. Is that accurate?
Yes. That was a good summary. And then I think we've beaten this horse to death, but the language relative to the support of the Board of Selectmen generally to acknowledging and supporting that waivers will be necessary to approve the plan as has been represented to this board.
I have a question, Eli, if I may.
Please go ahead, Mr.
Okay. Just want to get back to this these discharge standards. So we understand the phosphorus situation, and you've said it certainly will cost money to get down to the 0.05 level. It wasn't clear to me, either when John Witten spoke or when you spoke, is the 5 milligram nitrogen cutoff, is that pretty much a standard that's across the board? And
No.
that's not a problem, or is that also an issue?
It's not required. It would not be required because we're not discharging into a nitrogen sensitive area. It would not be required on this site. That's not in dispute. So Mr. Witten's representations, I would disagree with. If we were doing a conventional 40B and filing with this, as we will with DEP as part of a groundwater discharge permit, we would not be able to do that, and we would not have to do that, and that's not in dispute. So I don't want people to be dismissive that us doing it is not a big deal. It is.
So is your position that you won't necessarily look at any nitrogen discharge standard? You'll just look at the phosphorus one?
No. I'm agreeing to number 4.
Entirely in both
Yes.
for both
Yes.
measures. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We were focused on phosphorus, and
Yes.
nitrogen kind of got left out of the conversation.
I apologize. I'm agreeing to 4 in its entirety, not part of it.
Mr. Witten had a comment.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't want to get into a debate with Mr. Engler, but I do need to respond. And I was muted, so otherwise I would have jumped in. I wasn't able to. So thank you. I am an attorney. That's true, Mr. Engler. But I also wrote the entirety of the town of Manchester's watershed protection plan in 1988 with the hydrogeologist, Scott Horsley, and he and I together had the town work with the town to adopt some of the most restrictive protection mechanisms in the Commonwealth that has served the town extremely well for the past 40 years. So I know a lot about this stuff. The issue of nitrogen sensitive area is a red herring, and respectfully, Mr. Engler, you're wrong. That is not the only time cities and towns require 5 milligrams per liter on a downgradient property boundary. It's not nitrogen sensitive, that's a DEP regulation. The town of Manchester has been a lot more visionary than DEP has ever been by looking well beyond the wellhead and the surface water bodies that are currently in use. The town has regulated and protected that entire watershed area for decades, and that's what it seeks to do. And the way to do it is not allow one developer to claim, like you're claiming, that they can achieve a standard that is applicable in Rehoboth or in Worcester. It's not. One size does not fit all. 5 milligrams per liter is an appropriate standard acceptable across the Commonwealth. And the phosphorus standard that we've discussed earlier is also a respectable standard to preserve the surface water supplies that are vulnerable to phosphorus loading. So everything that I said was not just to represent the town of Manchester, my client, but everything that I've been saying for the past 40 years in this field is cities and towns need to protect their surface and groundwaters. And here's how you do it. You have an applicant like yourself, be regulated to a normative standard. So cumulatively, when your development is added to all the other developments in the watershed, the water body doesn't become unpotable. And that is a reasonable regulatory goal. And yes, your phosphorus standards will be more protective than abutting treatment plants, but that's good for you because your residents will now have potable water, safe drinking water, and I guarantee you will market that as part of your marketing campaign. So this is a good thing for you, Mr. Engler.
I have one question, all right? And I don't want to get into a philosophical debate, but it's your representation of towns that make things so stringent why 40B is necessary because you can't build anything. My question to you is, John, under a groundwater discharge permit to DEP, yes or no, would we be asked to meet these regulations?
Yeah, you have to meet a 5 milligram per liter standard. I'm also not going to respond to your engineer who's not available for discussion and be passing notes.
John, you cut out. Was it yes or no? I couldn't hear you.
First of all, Mr. Reg, I'm not going to answer interrogatories from you. I will tell you that if you apply for a groundwater discharge permit for this project, left alone, DEP is going to require a 5 milligram per liter standard on the downgradient property boundary because of the sensitive receptors, meaning drinking water, that's within this watershed.
Well, we don't have to debate this. The fact of the matter is I've agreed to it and it's significantly more money, so.
I think that Ann Harrison and Becky Jakes had comments.
My comment was what Mr. Engler had just said. I think we're arguing about something that he's already agreed to, and that's just going to make everyone unhappy. And I yield to Becky.
My apologies. I cannot activate my video, Eli,
No, you can't.
from this end.
That is because I will briefly allow you to do that. Please do so now.
There we go. All right, thank you.
If you turn it off, you won't be able to turn it back on.
I'm not going to do
Turned it
that.
off for everybody because we had Zoom bombers.
Right, thank you. That was all at the moment.
Oh, all right.
I just wanted to join the party.
Yeah.
Oh, Eli,
Yeah.
Jeff is having, I think, the same problem.
Me?
Jeff, can you speak? Are you good?
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
I'm sorry, wrong Jeff.
There's two Jeffs.
Oh.
Oh, there we go.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
we've also, this is a relatively minor topic, but we've also talked about various levels of support for the fire equipment and the Affordable Housing Trust. And I understand that we're being asked to make those contingent on the receipt of the MassWorks grant, but I would like to hear what Mr. Engler's current thinking is about the amount of money he's prepared to put into those funds if the grant is
So I'll reiterate from the original, the last set of conditions that were sent to us.
mhm.
Unconditioned on the grant was 250,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust. Conditioned on the grant was 500,000 to the fire department to be used at their discretion, 350,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust, and 100,000 to the turf field project. And then at the beginning of this discussion, he agreed that 100,000 would be put into the Affordable Housing Trust side. So that was 450,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust, plus the 500,000 conditioned on the MassWorks grant. Is that accurate, Mr. Engler?
Yes.
So if the MassWorks grant came through, we would have a total of 700,000 going into the Affordable Housing Trust, and then 500,000 into the fire department's equipment fund.
Thank you. That's, if we're all agreed on that, then wonderful.
I might ask a clarification, Eli, on the MassWorks grant. Is that a grant that is for the whatever the application is, the entire project that is being applied for? That is to say, if you apply for X, does the grant come back and say, well, we'll give you 50% of X? And maybe Mr. Engler can comment on that, or you apply for it and you get it or you don't get it.
Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on MassWorks grants. In fact, I've never applied for one. My understanding is, and it doesn't relate to our whole project, it would most notably relate to the sidewalk and even more so the connection to the municipal water and the water line. So we would need to do a fully advanced set of drawings, have a construction bid, package that up, in the appropriate form. Technically, the town would sign the application and it would go in, and we would be considered among many other municipalities applying for grants. So how the state, whether they give you a percentage, whether they give it you in the entirety, I couldn't say for sure.
But your offer on the table right now is contingent on an award, whatever that number is.
Well, on an award of $1 million or more, we're going to be applying for more than that likely, but I'm not going to get awarded $50,000 and then give another $1 million of mitigation to the town.
Okay.
So I have to have some sort of benchmark.
Just wanted to be clear on that. Yep.
And I have a proposal from who I've been told is the best consultant relative to working with municipalities to prepare these grants. Her name is April Anderson. I have not retained her yet, obviously, because we're talking about this, but if we reach an agreement, I'll be retaining her and she'll get to work, on this, but we have a lot of work to do relative to the design of the water line and sidewalk.
Thank you.
So Eli can provide a little more information if you like.
Yes, please.
So like any grant process, MassWorks is very competitive. They will often give you less than what you ask for. The more you can bring to the table in terms of matching dollars, the happier they are, but they do not require it typically. MassWorks also is very much geared towards job creation and economic development. And so if there are ways for us to show that extending the water line could serve other development, perhaps on the other side of Mr. English project, then that would probably enhance our application. So it would probably be a competitive application, but obviously there's never any guarantees.
I do know that MassWorks looks favorably on affordable housing creation. So that would obviously be a helpful component to this application.
Right. They're looking for jobs. They're looking for affordable housing.
Mr. Witten, do you have anything to add about MassWorks grants?
I don't, Mr. Chairman, that all sounds reasonable. Just a reminder that 25% of the units will be rented at a below market rate price. The remaining 75% are at market rate. So yes, this will be filed under a comprehensive permit program, but 75% of the units are going to be rented unrestricted as to price.
Where do we start on that chain? Mr. Round, you had asked that question, right?
I did.
Mr. England, where are you in the process of looking into the sidewalk work for that project?
What do you mean?
Well, we had asked you to look into the design for it and provide us as much detailed information as you could. And I was curious how far you got into it. I know that you were asking for the ADA support in
I have a plan, a schematic plan I can share with the board this week, you know, that shows the sidewalk on our property. But, you know, my engineer confirmed two things. A, you know, we can fit it, you know, a standard sidewalk. And B, it's not going to trigger any additional waivers or thresholds or things like that, you know, we're not going to be able to deal with. So we can do it. And I can send the town a plan that you can see, but, you know, we're committing to be able to do it.
Thank you.
all right.
Eli, if I may,
Yes, go ahead, Becky.
I thought that there was going to be a request for ADA waiver.
There is.
Okay, I thought I just heard you say that there weren't going to be any waivers, so.
Well,
Mike.
you're correct, and I apologize, I misspoke. I meant from, you know, various local wetlands or zoning bylaws.
Thank you for the clarification. I just.
Yeah, no, I apologize. We will need that ADA waiver.
Thank you.
Eli, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Is the construction of the sidewalk dependent on that ADA waiver?
Yes,
If the ADA waiver does not come through, there's no sidewalk?
correct.
Mr. Whitten, can you comment on the availability, as it were, of ADA waivers?
I am not aware, Mr. Chairman, of the difficulty of obtaining one. That's outside of my area. I don't know. And frankly, I'm not sure what the process would be, whether it involves the building commissioner in town or it's simply a function of the state. So I do not know, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I obviously spoke to my architect about it, who is knowledgeable in these, and he said for something like this, it would be, he would fully expect it to be approved, particularly with the support of the municipality.
Okay, that's something that we'd like to get a little bit more clarity on one way or another, so that we know what risk we're taking when we agree to the condition. All right. So a lot of these things are generally sorted out. And it seems like we've got a much smaller set of things that we need to make decisions on at this point. I think we've all made our points on nutrient loading. There's a little bit more information that we'd like to see on the sidewalk, but it seems like we're in basic agreement on that, assuming that we are confident in the ADA waiver, ability to get the ADA waiver. But I should actually poll the board members on this. Are you remain comfortable with supporting the ADA waiver if we can get it in order to get the sidewalks?
Yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes?
Yes.
All right.
However, Eli, I think it's important to understand the plan that Mr. Engler said that he would share with us. And whether, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but in terms of what I have read about ADA waivers, is that it will allow a 6% grade in short distances. And whether that's going to be possible under the proposed engineered plan that Mr. Engler has referred to.
So,
See, I don't think it's reasonable to consider the sidewalk as part of these negotiations if the ADA waiver is
unobtainable.
substantially unattainable.
All right. So, Mr. Engler, can you help us get to a place where we're going to be comfortable with the?
Well, do you want, I mean, I'm not sure what you're asking me. Do you want something from my architect that says something to the extent of their experience with some waiver? I mean, we can't apply for a waiver now, and we don't even.
No, I understand.
So I don't understand how I can get the board comfortable. I can have my civil and my architect prepare a brief memo that talks about, you know, the technical elements of the sidewalk and how the ADA waiver would be requested, when it would be requested, and based on their professional opinion, the likelihood of success. That's about the best I can do.
That'd be a good.
If you could also include a schematic of what you're planning to do.
Yeah, no, we already have that, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So Eli, so if Jeff is, Bob Turner is correct in terms of waivers are more easily obtained if there are short sections of exceeding the grades. The peer traffic peer reviewer provided some guidance as to what a sidewalk might look like in terms of the short, steep sections with flatter sections. And if the schematic is following a similar approach, then I think that would be very helpful.
I can work on that memo and I'll provide the plan.
Okay. So, the decisions that the board has to make in the current set of conditions is at this point, well, we're going to have to hear about the ADA waiver aspects. But at this point is reduced down to where we stand on the shuttle and where we stand on the accepting your terms regarding the non-contingent donations to the Affordable Housing Trust and the Fire Department if we want the nutrient loading and the sidewalk to be done. So those are the two main decisions points that I see the board needing to make right now. Plus, coming to an agreement on the statement regarding waivers. These other ones are more substantial from a capital standpoint. The other one is a political statement. Does that meet with where you believe we are, Mr. Anglin?
I think so. I mean, I think, put differently, I think I've agreed to what you're asking other than the shuttle, which I'd be willing to make the $20,000 capital contribution. And I would keep the same mitigation, but it's contingent on my receipt of a MassWorks grant, which we would prepare on our expense and, you know, work collaboratively with the town on. So I think you summarized it, Mr. Chairman, pretty well.
Eli, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
I know that we are negotiating or discussing regarding the shuttle service, but in your February 23rd email on item 22, you actually said 25,000 for the shuttle. I just thought I'd toss that out there.
Yeah, and I got an email from the town today at 4:30 that asked me to do nutrient loading and phosphorus limitations.
So you're actually reducing then what you're saying in other words, you know, you're saying no to our number 7 and then further reducing what you had said on number 22 in the February 23rd email. I just want to make sure we've got our numbers
How is
down.
that yeah, but how is that an accurate characterization? Because the town has asked me to do all sorts of things that I didn't know about on February 23rd.
Jeff, if I may, I'm just wanting to clarify the numbers with which we're working. That's all.
Listen, if it makes you happy, make it 25, all right? The $5,000, if it means making people happy, fine, all right, on a capital contribution to the shuttle. And that way you can say that I didn't come off what I originally offered.
So, okay, let's not, don't think it's gonna boot us to get into small amounts. And to be honest, $20,000 contribution, one-time contribution to the shuttle is, it really comes down to, at that point, are we interested in pursuing the shuttle or not? Because a $20,000 one-time contribution to the shuttle is honestly not going to help us very much in that front. And I understand your position that you don't think it's an effective thing. We had been dealing with parking issues in this town for years. I've been embroiled in a lot of difficult and unpleasant exchanges with residents and voters on issues related to parking. We've gone back and forth on a number of fronts on parking. We have a lot of people who swarm the town in the summer to go to the beach, and it generates a lot of tension. And it generates a lot of tension for the businesses and for the residents, and so it's a problem that we've been trying to address for a very long time. So we're trying our best to
Mr. Chairman, why don't you do this? All right, I made a commitment to the Affordable Housing Trust, non-contingent, 250. Why don't you split that and take 125 to the trust and put 125 to the shuttle and call it a day? Because you're still getting a big payment to the trust, as you know, if we get a grant. And honestly, it'd be, you know, if the town really wanted affordable housing, it would be a better and more efficient use of town funds to just say, Jeff, you know, $500,000 in the world of affordable housing for people trying to create housing, that's going to probably get you 3 or 4 units. You'd be better off saying, Jeff, do another 10 units, give us, you know, or do another, you know, 8 units, give us 2 more affordable units, and put that money somewhere else. You'd end up in the same place. I don't want to digress and take us into a different direction, but, you know.
Yeah.
So
No.
that would be my suggestion, is split the 250. If you care that much about the shuttle, the Affordable Housing Trust is still getting a bunch of money, and you get your money for your shuttle, and there you go.
Yeah. So the thing about the Affordable Housing Trust is the reason why we made that suggestion, why I made that suggestion in the first place a while back, was when we talked about the AMI number, the 80% AMI number, which was there was a request to reduce the AMI number to 60% from 80% for half or more of the units. And that was a non-starter for you. And the reason we made that request in the first place was we had an analysis from the Affordable Housing Trust that recommended strongly that we lobby for that, mostly because in this region, the 80% AMI number still leaves you know, people that we would like to be able to live here in town high and dry. We want more of our town staff and emergency services people to be able to live here. So the notion behind putting money into the Affordable Housing Trust was not, in this particular instance, to create more housing units, but to enable the Affordable Housing Trust to provide rental and housing assistance, which was in sense to make up for the fact that you couldn't come down on the 80% AMI. So I just wanted to clarify that that was the thinking around that, and it's why we anyway.
And Mr. Chairman, it's a noble cause. I don't dispute that for 1 second, but it seems like, you know, a lot of people are more interested in the shuttle than what you just spelled out. So that's a decision the board will have to make.
I wouldn't characterize it that way. I would have characterized the Affordable Housing Trust as something that we had already sorted out. You raised it just now as something that we could reopen by splitting it for a shuttle and an Affordable Housing Trust. So there are so on the shuttle side, and please forgive me about beating this horse a little bit more. The town has a community contribution that makes the MBTA that the MBTA swallows up, and in theory can be redirected to community transportation service. If that were something that something that we could revive, when we did look at something like that in the past, if that were something that could be revived, but to achieve the kind of service that we would like out of it would end up with a funding gap, would you reconsider some annual contribution to fill that gap so that we could put in place something if we were able to free up that money that otherwise went to the MBTA?
Mr. Chairman, I can't show my screen anymore. I don't think people care. They're probably happy about that. So not really. I mean, I don't know what that number is. And the stuff on the operating side, it scares the hell out of excuse my language, you know, my financial partners and stuff, because it's undefined. So I would prefer not to, you would have to specifically say what that expectation is. And it would have to be, you know, modest, honestly. So, and I don't think you know what that number is. So contributions on an ongoing basis that are undefined or are in a real estate developer's world is poison.
All right. Fair enough. Greg, do you have any comments around this before I'm go to the next little cycle here?
Well, I really think, despite the skepticism that's been expressed, I do think that a shuttle service has a lot of merit longer term. I think we could put a cap on what that contribution might be annually. You started out with 50. I think you would accept something that's smaller than 50. But I think an annual contribution, if the shuttle is working and has ridership that is deeming it worthwhile, is something that's going to serve the town well, and it's going to serve this development well. And I think it's worth going through a little more pain here to see if we can get to a yes. There's got to be a number here that can work.
So we haven't talked about any concrete definition for shuttle service. But we have had people make some representations to us in the past on shuttle service. And I wonder if it would be possible to dig out some of those old plans and get a quick refresh on them so that we could put together quickly something more concrete that we could talk about in less abstract terms and maybe help us get away from too much of a nebulous OPEX versus CAPEX discussion here, just to see if we can quickly come to a solution that would be agreeable on both sides. Greg, do you think that we could reach out quickly enough to get some information on that?
Yeah, so we have those old plans. We can fairly quickly dust them off and update some of the cost projections. I mean, the concepts that were developed in the past was basically a transit loop that was geared specifically, towards the morning commuting times and the evening commuting times, with a few runs during the day for the non-commuting public. And the CATA was fairly optimistic that the ridership, particularly for those commuter times, would be certainly sufficient to justify having such a loop system in town. Obviously, it didn't go over 128 when we were first looking at it, so this would be a little tail off of the normal loop, but I think that would make a lot of sense. And given the limitations at the T station for parking, providing that kind of support for people getting to the station, I think is something that would be highly desirable, as well as people who want to come to town and do a little shopping or go to the beach even, so that we can relieve some of the parking at the beach. So, so the short answer is yes, I think we could do some quick updating of those proposals and have a more specific number and talk about a contribution on an ongoing basis.
Mr. Engler, the board still needs to make a decision on regarding your position on the contingent versus non-contingent donations. And I know you want to make progress here, clear progress here. We've made pretty good progress on all of the other conditions that we've talked about here. What I was thinking about proposing right now is that we take all of the conditions that we've got so far and hand them over to Mr. Witten and if you want your people to draw up language around those, because we've been fairly broad in our language, and I know how people get tripped up at the end when language is not clarified. And in the meantime, we could take the time to go and chase down the shuttle information that I just described, and you could hand us the remaining sidewalk information that we need, and we can try to satisfy ourselves that the risk on the ADA waiver is acceptable. Is that an approach that you would be comfortable with?
Can I restate it just so I'm understanding it? For discussion's sake, let's say the next hearing is in 2 weeks. Between that time and tonight, Greg would research whatever he's going to research related to the shuttle and attempt to come up with some sort of, I'm not clear, operating budget or estimate on what my contribution would be as a percentage of that. Do I have that about right? Just on that point?
Yeah, options. We'll put together some actual concrete.
All right, I can say what it, you know, it's not going to be a 5-figure donation every year. It's just not. I can't do that. All right, I'd be more inclined to give some money up front, but on an ongoing basis, what if the ridership shows that, you know, we have 5 people from our development riding the shuttle? Now, it seems unfair that we're going to be asked to make such a significant contribution. Or what if other people in the town aren't using it? You know, and I know practically from a once again, from an urban planning standpoint, people are like shuttle, shuttle, shuttle. I've been involved in a lot of projects in a lot of other towns that pushed the shuttle and no one rode them. So, because there's just not enough density of people. I mean, buses work in downtowns and stuff and along certain routes because a lot of people are there. But if Greg wants to go through the exercise, that's fine, and I'll wait for that. But I just want to manage this board's expectations relative to all the other things you've asked me that I've agreed to. I just can't keep going and going and going. I'm sorry. So that's Greg's point. The second point is, yes, I can get my engineer and architect to prepare a memo. We can submit a plan on the sidewalk, and you can get effectively comfortable with both the sidewalk design and the process to get an ADA waiver. And the third and most important is you're on record as deploying Mr. Witten to work with my council and me on a development agreement. You know, based on the conditions or the offer I made in my 23rd memo and what you provided tonight, we can take a first pass at that. But we need, you know, I reach out to Mr. Whitten and he doesn't respond to my emails. We need you, I want the board to be on record as saying that you are commissioned to work with the attorney on acceptable language. Because, you know, this is a compromise, and if, you know, we have to give and we've given, but I don't know how to say this, but now is not the time for Mr. Whitten to try to draft his most stringent language, because the whole deal is going to fall apart and we've just wasted 10 months. And then we're, you know, so you get what I'm saying. So I hope he understands we're working collaboratively and cooperatively to try to come to an agreement that works for both parties. So if you're, you know, I would ask that you go on record and say, Mr. Whitten, you can start to work with Mr. Engler and his legal counsel. Mr. Engler's counsel will take the first pass of the development agreement and send it to you for your markup. And both parties will work in good faith and efficiently between now and the next hearing to have a draft agreement for this board to review that will not be inclusive of the sidewalk condition, which we can add, you know, where appropriate, shuttle, but it should be able to capture everything else. That would be my ask.
So a couple of things. One, that's fine. But one, I think it'd probably be important for us to make sure that we are not asking Mr. Whitten to provide so much of his time over the next 2 weeks that he can't do his various different other commitments, and meet the requirements that you just said. And also, I think we do need to go around to my board members and see if they support the rough proposal that I just laid out. So first, let's do board members and see if they have support for that basic approach. We'll go around the circle here. Ms. Jakes.
I am still contemplating.
Mr. Round.
Yes, I think that's a good next step, and we're just going to kind of narrow things down. And when that gets put together, well, then, you know, we'll narrow it down to just one or two, maybe just one issue that we really have to resolve. But I think it makes sense as the next step.
Ms. Harrison.
I think we've made significant progress this evening. And I'm sorry that it's Mr. Engler's view that Mr. Whitten hasn't been communicating with him, but I'm not sure that was Mr. Whitten's charge. I would like to see those items that we've agreed to written out in legal language. And I'm sure we both know that there's a lot of stuff that happens between a handshake and a contract. But yes, let's go ahead with that.
Mr. Bodmer Turner.
Echoing what Ann Harrison just said, the devil is in the details. I don't like the characterization that Mr. Whitten would be writing something from a particularly legalese point of view that was unsuitable to Mr. Engler. The devil is in those details, and we need to expose where the broad language that's been used tonight has been misunderstood by either of the parties.
Mr. Whitten, are you available to work with Mr. Engler and SLV over the next couple of weeks to come up with some language? Do we need to use well, I'll stop right there.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to, if that's the direction of the board. I've got the time and happy to do it. But let me just add, Mr. Engler reached out to me one time that I did not respond to. And the explanation for that is I charged the town of Manchester for my time. And I'm not going to charge the town of Manchester to be responsive to Mr. Engler unless the board directs me to do that. So Mr. Engler fully knows that. It's really unfortunate for Mr. Engler to have characterized it that way because he knows full well I had asked him whether he was a represented party because he knows or should know that if he's a represented party, I cannot speak to him as a lawyer. So I did not return his email for good
That's
reason.
a lie, John. I'm not a represented party. I don't have counsel. I told you that.
Mr. Chairman, if somebody calls me a liar, he better be able to back that up. That is an outrageously offensive comment, and I will not be on the receiving end of that from you, Mr. Engler. You are a represented party because you just mentioned your counsel. And by having counsel means you're a represented party. So if the board, Mr. Engler, don't interrupt me. If the board directs me to work with you, I will work with you. But you are not going to be able to get return calls from me without the board's authorization. And that's that. And that's how every municipality works in the country. So, Mr. Chairman, of course, I will work at the board's direction to resolve an agreement in draft form for the parties to review.
Okay, and we're going to stop there. And so we have the broad agreement with the board on the approach that I just laid out. Mr. Witten is going to work with Mr. Engler and SLV to build up some language over the next couple of weeks on the terms that we've talked about so far. We're going to chase down the shuttle side of things and see if we can come up with a proposal that we can somehow to get to an agreement on. Mr. Engler, you are going to work with your architects and engineers to deliver the memo on the sidewalks that's going to help us be clear on the ADA waiver. And that's where we stand right now. And the meeting that we would be aiming for would be in 2 weeks, which would be on Thursday, March 18th. Is everybody ready to do Thursday, March 18th at the same time?
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, I think the suggestion of having Mr. Engler, his office or his team take a first stab at the draft is a good approach. And then at least I will have and the board will have their position, their interpretation of the conversation from tonight, and then we can work on that draft to create a second draft for the parties to review.
Mr. Engler, are you willing to do that?
Yeah, that would be fine. I'm going to have to retain counsel because I don't have a lawyer and I haven't had a lawyer, which is why I've represented myself throughout this. I've never been represented. So I'll retain counsel and we can move forward. We'll create the first draft.
All right. Thursday, March 18th, 6:30.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm not going to be taking public comment tonight. No, let's just leave it at that. I think we've got enough. We're still alive and we made some progress. That's a good thing. All right. I think that's all we're going to do tonight. And members, the public, if you have any comments on the terms of the agreement that we are, and by the way, it's not an agreement. This is not a contract. This is actually a letter of endorsement. The conditions end up being binding on the board and the zoning board just for these terms of the conditions. So it's not actually a contract that we're negotiating, just so you're clear. But those conditions, if you have any comments on them, we will post the documents that we are working from. We already have posted the ones from the developer, and we'll post the updates to our website. Members of the public have comments on those conditions, then please email them to us. I'm not going to be taking public comment tonight. I think that's it. So any other comments from board members before we call it a night?
I think it's important for the residents of the town to understand that when we have more clarity about the write-up of what was discussed tonight, that that's the basis for comment.
All right. Can I get a
Move to
motion?
adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question? This is I guess a little bit more towards Mr. Whitten, but I think what we're drafting is the development agreement, right? It's not just bullets to go into a letter of support. It's not a contract per se, but it's binding me to commitments I've made and binding the board to commitments it's made. So that's what we were going to provide to Mr. Whitten is, you know, he can tweak it however he wants or whatever form, but I think it's more than just a letter. Mr. Whitten, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I concur. It is, there's really two things. One is a development agreement and the other is going to be the BOS's endorsement, which is the letter to DHCD. They're one in the same in terms of content, but I agree with Mr. Engler in terms of structure. One is contractual and one is a letter signed by the Board of Selectmen, or both are signed by the Board of Selectmen, but one is going to DHCD and one is going to stay internal. So yeah, I agree with that.
Right, okay.
Harrison, can I get a second? No? All right.
I'll
wait.
Second.
Okay.
Got a lot of
All
seconds.
right, any discussion? All in favor, Ms. Harrison?
Yes. Oh, damn it. It
Eli?
froze.
No, I can't hear you, Eli.
Eli, you're out.
I think, yeah, Eli froze.
Okay, so who else? Let me go through and ask the other parties. Oh, he's back.
He's back.
Yep. Mr. Round,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Did you freeze yourself? Yes.
Case.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Bowling votes yes as well. All right, good night, folks. I know that collapses on me.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.